Welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Billy Hallowell, and today we are talking all things inauguration, President Donald Trump's second term. A lot to break down here. I am with Ryan Foley from the Christian Post. Ryan, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. You had a pretty crazy week. You were interviewing people in and around the inauguration, around the proceedings in Washington, D.C. There's so much to talk about here, but let's just start from a 30,000-foot view. What most stood out to you in those interviews and discussions?
Oh, what stood out to me the most was that it seemed like everybody I talked to, except for one person, was attending a presidential inauguration for the very first time.
That's interesting. You know, I wonder, why do you think that is? Were they younger people? Were they older? Was it a mix?
It was a mix. There were some older people, there's like a high school kid I talked to, then there were also some Canadians there, which I wouldn't have expected to see. So there was quite a mix.
Yeah, yes, especially in light of the fact that there's been a lot of talk about making Canada a U.S. state and all the all of these other sort of entertaining tidbits that have come from Trump. But that's interesting. So people coming for the first time to an inauguration, there must have been excitement. I mean, what was the general tone? And of course, it's anecdotal. You're talking to the people you're talking to, but when it comes to their tone regarding Trump and the inauguration, how are they feeling?
They were disappointed but understanding as to why the inauguration had been moved indoors, while some of them wished there had been jumbotrons placed in the National Mall. A lot of them acknowledged that the cold weather and security concerns stemming from the previous attempts on Trump's life meant that it made sense to hold it indoors.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it would be pretty disappointing to spend money, go all the way to Washington in hopes of, and many people had tickets. In fact, I know people who had tickets and then they couldn't go. That is disappointing when you sort of have made those plans and spent that money. How did they? I mean, how did they react to that? You said they were disappointed, but were they were understanding mostly the people you interacted with?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how they shifted plans so quickly. And I think obviously the real reason these people were going to this even for the first time is because they were excited. They, I would imagine, had hope in this president. There's a lot of different opinions about Trump, but there are both detractors and supporters, and he won the popular vote this time. So there were more supporters, it seems, this time around than there were the past two. But what is the biggest hope with those people you spoke with when it comes to Trump in his second term? What are they most hoping to see?
A lot of people talked about border security and the economy, as well as Trump's signature slogans such as Make America Great Again and America First. Other hopes listed by people I talked to include the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as the defense of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, those are all big issues, and they are issues that, again, differences of opinion on how Trump is handling them. There are issues that matter to a lot of people. I mean, deportation flights have begun as we're speaking right now. Trump has held strong on rounding people up already that he said he was going to do. I mean, a lot of the issues you just mentioned, I find a few very interesting elements of this. He takes strong positions on them, and people have reacted, particularly immigration and Israel, and supporters have reacted very favorably to those positions. But B, I mean, with it's been less than a week of him in office, he has taken steps in all of those directions on the issues that you just mentioned. So, when we talk about people's hopes, if your hope was he would do the things you just described, I mean, for those people, at least so far, I would imagine they are probably pretty happy with some of the steps they've seen him take. One of the bigger things, and this has been for Trump an underpinning, and it's been both an Achilles heel in the eyes of, I think, some progressives and something that many conservatives have liked, but this role that faith has played in Trump himself, right? There's a lot of debate around, is Trump a Christian? Is he not? Why is he so close with evangelicals? And this is a whole other conversation. But when it came to the inauguration, what role did faith itself play in those proceedings?
Well, Trump brought up faith in his inaugural address, saying that he was, quote, saved by God to make America great again, referring to the assassination attempts. He also said, we will not forget our country, we will not forget our Constitution, and we will not forget our God. There was also the controversy about him not putting his hand on the Bible, which observers seem to think was a result of Chief Justice John Roberts administering the oath of office before First Lady Melania Trump, who was holding the Bibles used in the ceremony, was standing next to her husband.
Yeah, when you watch the video of it, and those for those who watched it happen live, the oath started and she was still making her way up there, right? And there's no constitutional requirement that somebody's hand be on the Bible. It's part of the proceedings. He clearly had planned that, which is why there were two Bibles he selected that she was holding. But it seemed to be more of a consequence of the events that were going on and the speed with which it was happening than it was anything else. Of course, people have made a big deal of that. And of course, there was also the faith controversy with the bishop, the female bishop who, spoke out during her sermon at the interfaith, prayer event. And that was a whole other thing that sparked a lot of headlines. But it is interesting to see the role of faith still in our presidential election, something that's gone back to the history, to the beginning, even before the beginning of this nation, the integration of faith with our leaders. Now, when you spoke with people, how did the people with whom you spoke view Trump when it came to his impact, not just on faith, but values in America?
Well, one person I talked to explicitly hoped that a Trump presidency would lead to a return to a Christian civilization, recalling how Americans were more religious when he was younger, and now the culture has drastically changed. Another expressed confidence that Trump would advance the
Mm.
defense of Christian values in his presidency.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people who critique him would say, well, he's an unlikely figure to do this, right? Like, why is he the one who is sort of ushered this in? And there's lots of opinions, is he just sort of rallying the base? I don't know that supporters really care, because I think the end result for them is that they would like to see more faith and values in America. And so regardless of whether the person, and I'm not saying he doesn't, I'm just highlighting the debate, regardless of whether the person himself embodies those things. I mean, look, Roe has been overturned. There's a list of things. The capital of Israel was moved to Jerusalem that he had taken action on that were important to many evangelicals. So it will be interesting to see if he continues to live out those faith and values in a second term, and at least in terms of his policies. What else would you want us to know about the inauguration, your experience covering it?
Well, it was my first time ever going to an inauguration as well, so I really have no baseline when it comes to measuring the crowd size, at least based on personal experience. All I know is that it was the first time since Ronald Reagan's second inauguration in 1985 that the oath of office was administered indoors.
Yeah, that's a big detail and a big change. I know they cited the weather. It was cold. I was there in DC too, but I think too the security concerns had to have been a factor in this in light of everything that has happened this year. Well, Ryan Foley, appreciate you taking the time to break it all down today on the Inside Story. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Everyone else, make sure you head on over to the Christian Post. You can see Ryan's coverage over there and read all the news you need to read at thechristianpost.com. We will see you again for another episode of the Inside Story next week.